Biggest thing is we need to capture attention right when it's at its peak, because it's kind of like when you go to a concert or maybe some kind of musical or something, they funnel you deliberately past that one area where they're selling overpriced merchandise because they know they need to capitalize on the enthusiasm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profit to the People, the official podcast of Republic, where we believe you have the power to invest in the future you believe in. I'm your host, Lisa Carmen Wang, head of brand at Republic, and I'll be taking you behind the scenes to meet the team, founders, and investors in our community who share their insights on the future of investing and how they're bringing profit back to the people. To learn more how you can invest, head over to republic.co and follow us on all socials at Join Republic and at Lisa Carmen Wang. Today, I'm here with Spencer Smith. He's an early stage investor, having invested in over 20 companies on Republic, as well as in accredited deals in FinTech and crypto like Kraken, BlockFi, MotoRefi, and Republic itself. He is also one of the early investors in Republic Realm, our metaverse fund. And he's also been dubbed a social media expert as named by Forbes. He's the founder of Amplify, and his book, The ROI of Social Media, Top of Mind, was featured in Forbes and is an Amazon bestseller. Today, Spencer will be sharing his journey into early stage investing and how he's built a basket of diversified investments. Spencer, welcome to Profit to the People.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Really appreciate it.
So to get started, tell us about how you got into early stage investing.
I had been investing in real estate for quite a few years, and the real estate market started getting pretty frothy, and I started getting outbid on all cash deals. And I realized there probably wasn't as much upside as there was before, and started getting involved with an angel group that's been around for a really long time here in Madison, Wisconsin. Admittedly, though, our deal flow is pretty low because we do this all part-time. And where I was informed about Republic was from Sahil through Gumroad and his raise that he had done that coincided perfectly with the new Reg CF rules that went from 1 million to 5 million. And after exploring the Republic ecosystem, I realized that there were a lot of deals here that were really well vetted, where you could do your due diligence on top of what Republic had already done, and started building the basket of Diversify portfolios that we have right now.
So you're in Madison, Wisconsin. That's actually where I'm from originally. And you talked a little bit about just the lack of deal flow in your area. And so, I mean, as someone now who's in New York, right? And I'm always between New York and Silicon Valley, and a lot of the conversation is happening there. How do you make sure that you continue to stay up to date? And are you bringing in more investors from your local community into early stage investing?
I'm trying to. I think it's a very unfamiliar thing for a lot of people, unless they're accredited, because they've been at least apprised of what's possible in the angel space before. What I feel like Republican and others are doing so well with Reg CF investments, it allows rather nominal investments in places where people really believe in both the mission of the company as well as the founder. And again, that's where I have to give a lot of props to the Republic platform, because you can vet both the company as well as the team behind it and ingratiate yourself with what the team is doing. So that's where I feel like it's just a cool way to spread the word amongst other people that I know who maybe haven't played in the space before, to say, hey, go check out this platform, find out what you might be into, and then take a look at vetting the deals yourself.
What was that learning curve like, doing your first angel investment, figuring out what questions to ask founders or to ask about the business?
I think it's really challenging, because what I love about the startup space is people are so overwhelmingly optimistic. And if you look at their pro formas, I mean, everything is just up and to the right constantly, right? But I think it's taking that with a grain of salt and assessing what the total available market could be and the addressable market could be, and maybe asking those founders the really hard questions about their experience in either growing a company before, doing business development, raising money. So that's where, again, Republic does such a great job on the front end of those things, to know that the due diligence process that Republic has done is so well versed, as well as it's impactful from the standpoint of knowing that I can get past that idea. Is this legit? Are these numbers that we're looking at right now, are they well founded, or are they just kind of made up?
So you've now invested in over 20 companies. You have, I think, over 12 sectors. You've invested in different impact areas. You've invested in multiple minority founders. What is it that attracts you to a deal?
I think it's a lot more than the upside, Lisa. It's really the founder's journey and knowing that when things are very early, you can actually get the ear of the founder and simply ask, how can you be of service? So whether it's Salone Monet, who I've had great conversations with, whether it's Emily and her team at Lowbucks in Chicago, it's offering help where I feel like in the public equities market, as much as you want to wish your investments well or try to support the company as one person or even as a group of people, it's really hard to make an impact. But I feel like because we can have these early conversations with these companies and find out what they're trying to accomplish and maybe make introductions or offer services or whatever the case might be, that's where it's been really fun. So I think it's really based on what I've seen in the discussion of the companies that are trying to raise on Republic. Are they having a back and forth conversation, or are those conversations being kind of left dormant? So that's really my main criterion is, are the founders who are raising money, are they engaging with their community?
So you would reach out directly to the founders and have those one-on-one calls?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And some weren't receptive to it. Some, frankly, didn't want to have the conversation, and then it just didn't make sense to invest. So it's really up to them if they want to converse or not.
Tell me about all the different sectors you've invested in.
Yeah, it's pretty widespread. With the accredited stuff, it's a lot of crypto and tech. I'd come up through IBM Global Services 20 plus years ago, and they were talking about the zeros and ones and how data is going to rule the world. I'm like, what are you talking about? We have 40 megabyte hard drives. What data is there? But all of that stuff that I learned way back in the day has really come to pass. And I think looking at these early accredited opportunities like the Kraken, BlockFi, MotoRefi, which is another financial services company, it allows you to then take that sector that I feel is still nascent and get in rather early on it, but not super, super early. So not seed stage, but a little after that. As the other ones go, the Reg CF goes, I really look at opportunities that are more trending. So if we look at like non-alcoholic beverage or direct to consumer brands that are maybe looking at a brand style where people want to eat better or they want to interact or understand more where their food comes from, that's where I feel like we can make some pretty impactful investments. So it's on the Reg CF side, it's about third food and beverage, and the rest is in mostly technology and real estate.
On the food and beverage side, do you try to get samples of it and actually taste it yourself before you invest?
No, I haven't. So I really look at the numbers in that case because I don't feel like I'm a good gauge personally for this stuff. So I'd love to say, yes, I've tried all of these products before I've invested in them, but I really look at the sentiment that's out there. And frankly, being in the Midwest, as you know, usually stuff comes from the coast in. So we're rather late adopters across the board with a lot of this, a lot of the food and beverage.
What sort of outside research do you do in addition to speaking to the founders?
It's looking at the press around the company and if those who wrote about the company, if they're consistent with the wording that they use. So is it scattered, or does it seem to be rather consistent? Meaning, is the founding team locked in on their value proposition, right? Like, are we seeing that unique selling proposition throughout the interviews? And if that's consistent, I feel like they've got things pretty well dialed in as to what they're trying to accomplish. And the conviction, I think, comes through in those interviews as well. So it's mostly outside interviews and then video interviews, if I can find those as well.
That's a really interesting point. The consistency and the conviction with their language and messaging. I mean, I think for me as someone in branding, and I think for you and someone social media, it's like, I think there is so much noise out there. And so it's like what you've just distilled is you actually want to see that repetition, right? Like that consistency.
Yeah. And I think just to add on that, I think the idea of pivoting has become very popular and it's expected, but it's hard to make an investment in a company that hasn't found at least its path, because pivots are, like I alluded to, inevitable, but it's hopefully not something that you have to experience beyond too far down that roadmap, if you will, that a company might have.
Can you tell us about a specific, maybe just share a story around like a success story or a particular founder company that really stood out to you?
I think the folks from Drink Monday have been great, both in communicating back and forth with me. Chris is the founder. I know he was on a past podcast with you as well. And I think listening to what it is that the community has asked for in the discussion. So help us understand what a non-alcoholic or non-alcoholic spirit. I'm trying to remember exactly what they would refer to them as because the industry keeps moving a little bit. But beyond that, it's the impact that they're trying to make from the story standpoint. So when Chris talks about his story where he was partying over the weekend, he'd love to go out with friends on Sunday, but he can't because of these issues with drinking alcohol. I think that's what really pulls through as far as I can put myself as well as others in that story and go, oh, this is why this guy and his team created this solution and how it's now become more viable than just an idea. So I think it's really the way that they framed their solution to be something that is answering questions or addressing issues that people might have right now.
Are there any times when you almost invested, but for some reason or another, a red flag came up and you decide not to?
Yeah. I'd rather not name the companies. It's more, frankly, it's me lamenting losing some deals. Like I couldn't get in on Avalanche, which just launched through the Labs product, which I really, really wish I could have gotten in on. So it's more the missed deals because of illiquid situations versus anything that I found any major red flags.
So you mentioned also that you are able to add value to companies that you invest in. So what has that journey been like after you've invested?
I think it's just offering to be objectively helpful because any of those that are, especially founders that are so deep in what they're doing, it's really hard to zoom out and take a 30,000 foot view. So what we do with our company is try to take a look at what might be analogous to what certain founders are doing in one industry, where it's had an answer or some kind of solution in another industry. So how do we take that and maybe pull it in? So I think it's just more, as opposed to being prescriptive right off the bat, it's saying, hey, here's some experience that we've had. I thought it might be helpful for you to check this out, or if we can be of help just to get on a call with you. That's where it just is more of a friendly ear, knowing that you have somebody who's literally invested in your company to help make better decisions or at least help people process a little bit as well. Because founders oftentimes don't have anybody they can turn to. So it's more of a peer review, if you will.
And what would you say your expertise is in terms of the value add that you give to founders?
I think it's learning from a lot of mistakes, like learning how not to do things. But then also I've had the good fortune of doing a lot of brand building from a public speaking standpoint and finding where founders might want to go as far as building their personal brand. So what do you want to be online? How would you like people to view you? And then how do you convey that message? So it's talking about when you're giving speeches, building speeches, turning any kind of conference opportunity into something beyond just getting on stage or having a booth. Like how do we make more of an impact? That's the kind of stuff that I love to talk about with founders.
What are some of those things that you should do?
Yeah, sure. So one of the hacks, if you will, when it comes to speaking is you can get up on stage and try to address something. If you have any kind of prolonged period of time where people's attention spans might wane a little bit, and by that I mean like 15 or 20 minutes or more, we usually think about speeches in segments, which would be you pose a question, then you tell a story, and then you talk about the outcome of the story, and then you give a challenge to the audience. So it follows a narrative. In other words, you place a question in someone's mind, you walk them through a story where they can visualize, and you say, okay, as a result of this story, what are you going to do with it? And I think that makes an impact, especially when people are trying to make some kind of change, which is pretty much what we see as startups doing across the board, is like, how do we impact change? So that's probably the best hack I can give when it comes to building speeches, I guess.
And then what do you typically recommend them to do after to spread the word about their company?
Biggest thing is we need to capture attention right when it's at its peak. Right? Because it's kind of like when you go to a concert or maybe some kind of musical or something, they funnel you deliberately past that one area where they're selling overpriced merchandise because they know they need to capitalize on the enthusiasm because, 12 hours later, you're not going to pay $45 for a t-shirt, right? So I think as of that point, when we close a talk, we need to have some kind of short code up on the screen with a call to action, like text this initials, our name or whatever, to this short code, and then we'll give you something in return. And it's consistently moving past that, past the speech to try to get people in your ecosystem and communication that way.
And what have you given?
In the last speech I just gave last week in Las Vegas, I got to do a closing keynote, and it was the first chapter of the book that I'd written that you cited in the intro as a PDF. And then ongoing, it would be 2 different courses that we have, one around LinkedIn for advertising, and then one around LinkedIn Sales Navigator.
Oh, wow. So you just gave those for free for everyone.
Yeah. just to get them in our ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I think this idea of personal brand is really important also as an investor, because especially as a new angel investor, I think you need to put yourself out there in terms of the what you're focusing on, what your investment thesis is. So how have you built your personal brand online, whether as an investor or a branding or social media expert or speaker?
It's really focusing on the stuff that we're figuring out that's difficult that you try to make easy. So in other words, it takes a lot of work to give 250 speeches over a period of 5 years, but to distill it down into the segmentation that I gave you from a speaking standpoint, or before, during, and after a speech, what do you do? So I think it's looking almost in retrospect, like what would I have benefited from had I known those things? And that's a certain personality style, right? Like if you can be thoughtful and say, how can I help others do better compared to what I'd done? That's really where I try to build my personal brand. So any founders out there, any early stage investors, because you're taking action, you're going to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And if you can distill that down into stuff that's demonstrable for other people, that's where I think you can really start to build a good following.
What are some of the tips that you've shared recently?
One of the top ones is thinking about early stage investing as being analogous to real estate, in the sense that you typically would not buy a property as a long-term buy and hold investor and immediately expect returns. So early stage investing is not a flipping idea, right? You don't go in and say, I'm going to buy something and then get rid of it right away. So I think it's understanding what are the fundamentals that what would apply to real estate would also apply to early stage investing as well. So take a look at the founding team, take a look at the revenue model, take a look at the market opportunities, et cetera. That I think is really important to share. And then also, Lisa, I think it's very important to look at social media, especially as a way to broadcast other people's accomplishments and show them that you're listening. So whenever I see Republic on my feed and talking about the latest podcast that you've launched, make sure to like that, retweet it, and then spread the word that way. So just trying to bring value to the audience that way.
That's a great way of looking at it. When you think about, the more and more investments you make, you have more and more essentially call it value that you want to bring to founders. How do you think about managing this growing portfolio?
I think because early stage itself, because it's so illiquid, it's nice in a way. So if you contrast early stage investing to crypto, which is the antithesis of that, right? 24/7 constant market updates. You have these massive volatility. I think it's looking at this basket of investments and saying, do I have conviction in what it is they're doing? And if the answer is yes, then I look for other opportunities that would be ancillary to that. Because the nature of early stage, right, is you raise and then you close. So the opportunity is there and then it's gone. I think it's really then looking at what the learnings are from buying into certain opportunities and then seeing if there's stuff analogous to that you might further. So it's not as much actively managing the portfolio, because I think that might be a misnomer, at least for me. I don't actively manage that way.
When you think about a new investor who's just starting, how did you think about the amount of money you wanted to allocate into early stage investing?
Frankly, with the Reg CF, I usually would do the max, because it wasn't impactful enough to just do small amounts of money. But if I were talking to a new investor who maybe has some misgivings about the opportunities, or if this were to go to zero, how would I feel? What Republic has done a wonderful job of doing is saying you can enter with very nominal amounts and start to learn that way. As much as I'd like to say, paper trading this stuff could work, I don't think it really gets you in the ecosystem, if you will, of any of these founders or their companies, because you don't pay as much attention to the discussion or the updates. So I think it's even making a nominal investment and then just really paying attention to the updates and finding what it is that's happening and learning from there.
When you think about just the intentionality with which you invest, you've invested in a number of underrepresented and minority founders. What are your thoughts on that in terms of investing in diverse leaders?
I think probably the best example I can think of is Backstage Capital, because not only are they one that have a minority founder, but they also have made their mission to back minority founders. I think there's massive alpha opportunities as far as trying to find those who weren't able to get funding before and supporting their mission, because they're going to succeed if they have the right amount of funding. And if they're overlooked by others, well, then you can capitalize on that, if you will. So I think the meritocracy in this industry, especially in capital raising, will become more and more the norm versus you don't look or you don't act or you don't come from where I think you should have been. So that's what I think Republic does a wonderful job of doing, is truly democratizing the opportunities to invest in founders and what their missions are very early.
Mm. And when you're looking at, let's say, your upcoming investments through the end of the year, are you opportunistically seeing what comes out, what catches your eye, or do you have any sort of process or number that you're trying to hit?
There's not a number. As much as I'd like to be a good portfolio manager and say, yes, I have the exact allocation, with what's happening in many of these markets, what used to be a standard portfolio allocation is now completely off. And it's mostly because of crypto and NFT gains like Republic Realm, like you had mentioned earlier. So I think it's looking at the emails that I get from Republic and saying, is this opportunity worth looking into or not? And if it is, can I make a meaningful enough investment to, within the context of the portfolio as a whole, to make a commitment both figuratively and literally in this space? Because there's always that, all right, am I going to make the wrong investment or not? So I really rely on the proactivity of the Republic team to keep me abreast of what's happening with the deals.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Are there people, in going back to just your local community, are there a lot of people in your community who are investing, or that you've curated, maybe that's an online community of people, of other angel investors that you're able to talk to?
Yeah, within the Discord channel in Republic Realm, that's been a really, really good place to share stories, because I think anytime you get a bunch of people together that are of comparable minds, you don't have to start from zero. Like if I'm talking to another parent at the soccer game and say, hey, have you thought about early stage investing? Like there's no context, right? It might just be brushed off. But I love the Discord communities that are being built around many, many different ideas, whether it's Republic Realm or DeFi as a whole, or really any kind of early stage stuff. So I think that anybody who's listening who hasn't explored Discord yet, or various channels in which they can engage and learn from others, there's a lot of opportunities there to figure stuff out.
Interesting. And speaking of Republic Realm, how did you get involved and start getting interested in digital real estate and the metaverse?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. One of the gentlemen, Joad from your team, had reached out and he said, hey, I noticed you've done a lot of Reg CF investing and thought this might be something you're interested in. And it was very much up my alley, because they were talking like traditional real estate investors, just applied to digital. So if we look at cap rates and other opportunities like that, where you could understand that they're clearly looking at it from a real estate perspective, that made me very comfortable. And that, coupled with the fact that NFTs and the metaverses are really starting to hit their stride now. This is, I think, back in March, Lisa, that we were originally talking about Republic Realm, but now it's just been so phenomenal to see Web3 and NFTs and all of this stuff really start to hit the mainstream. So that was my introduction to NFTs and crypto, if you will, from the standpoint of investing in NFTs. And I thank Republic Realm for that, because the NFTs have really become a massive part of what we do now as well.
Yeah. What are your thoughts in terms of just buying digital real estate and the future of that?
I think it's fascinating, both because there's so many different styles, whether it's Decentraland or Sandbox or others, is that Decentraland seems as though they're setting up a way for people to have virtual real estate that's functional, right? So I'm going to build a store and then sell wearables for avatars. Like that might be a play, where something like Sandbox is still very much in its infancy, like it's still in alpha. So it's really incumbent upon those who own the land or who source the land to others to turn it into something. But I think what's really important about this, Lisa, is that the ownership of it, what Web3 allows us to do, because we can own our digital assets, just makes people feel different. So again, it's still so early for this stuff, but if you give people an option, if you're going to go into a virtual world where you can own something versus something where you're just renting, you're just playing, I'm probably going to err on the side of owning something instead.
Interesting. And what are some of the industries that you're most bullish on going forward?
Gaming is probably the number one. Gaming, because video games is such a huge business. And up until this point, until fairly recently, much of that much of the economics have been controlled by really large companies, and they're the direct beneficiaries. But if you can tell me that I can play a game and again own that asset, or I can trade assets with others, I could perhaps make money playing games like we've seen in Axie Infinity with some of the underdeveloped countries in the world. I think that's a phenomenal way to really democratize the wealth that can be built. So I think gaming is probably the number one, video gaming specifically.
Got it.
Yeah.
Have you done any video game investments?
Yeah. Axie Infinity, Synergy of Sarah. What else? Influence. There's a lot that we've done so far. So yeah.
And what's the return potential on those from your perspective?
If it's at all like some of these other NFTs where I was fortunate enough to get in early, like the Bored Ape Yacht Club or VFriends and some of these other ones where we've seen 100x returns. If it's even close to that, I think it should be pretty promising, especially as the ecosystem evolves around what that game means and what it represents.
Yeah, incredible. How would you define a good investor?
Man, that's a really good question. I think the good investors don't FOMO too hard, and they don't have paper hands. So because I'm throwing around, industry speak. So I think FOMOing is when people have a fear of missing out on something that they go, oh man, I could have had that and I missed out, because you're always going to miss out. So I think it's more just getting over the fact that you're going to miss out on things. And then when I talk about paper handing, I think that's a level of impatience, because you have a 24/7 worldwide marketplace, to invest in something and expect something that has a high degree of immediate return or immediate whatever it might be, some kind of news that's going to pump what you own. That's probably the biggest detriment that I've seen in other investors, is that they get out too early, as opposed to recommitting to projects or understanding that projects take a really, really long time to play out.
At what point did you start gaining confidence in your own investing capabilities?
I'm still not confident. I mean, I still FOMO really hard. That's why I share that story. I think it's the commonalities that we have within the Discord communities that I mentioned before, where if you trade ideas with like-minded people, it's not as much confirmation bias. It's really more so like, why did you make this investment, and how, and what do we believe in moving forward? And then again, the access to the founders is huge. Right. So if a founder goes silent for too long, I'll reach out to him or her and say, hey, you know what, we as a community, we haven't heard from you in a while. Can you maybe reinforce why we should continue to back the project and feel good about the project? So again, that level of accessibility is just something that is impossible in larger equity markets. So that I think is really the big thing for me, Lisa, is just reaching out to people proactively.
And what advice would you have for new investors, like just very tangibly or specifically, who are entering the space?
Be prepared to have your investments go to zero and be okay with that, because it's going to happen. But then also look at a basket of stocks or a portfolio of investments that you can manage effectively. Meaning if you maybe have 10 early stage investments and one does really well, 9 go to zero, at least feel good about picking the right one. But it's kind of like getting romantic about playing fantasy football. Like your players don't care about you. The companies really need your assistance, both from the standpoint of the financial backing, but then also offering to help as well. So that's what I can maybe offer, is don't be shy about reaching out to those that you're backing and let them know why you're supporting them, because every founder, me, everybody else, like we all vacillate right between this is awesome and this is terrible. So just being that sympathetic ear, being able to help, I think is really important.
And I mean, one thing that I think might come to mind as a hesitation for people is even just the amount of time that this takes. How do you balance your time as a founder of your own company, as well as an investor, and doing a number of other things and helping founders?
It is, at least for me, it's consistent, very early mornings, making sure that I'm staying on top of things. So as opposed to trying to batch stuff together, I try to look for trends. And again, within these Discord communities, pay attention to what the sentiment is consistently across time, and then make it something that I have exposure to on a literal daily basis. So not even weekends off. So for me, it's a passion. So it just kind of makes sense to do that. Maybe for the layperson, it's monitoring the updates or the discussion points on the companies in which they have an interest in investing or that they've already invested in, just to make sure that they know what's happening, so they don't feel like they're out of the loop.
And do you think someone who's entering should start with a specialized focus or a generalized, try out all these different companies?
I think it's really tough to say because it depends very much on their investment objective. So if I have $100 that I'd like to throw at an investment, I'm probably going to pick something that I feel really good about or I feel passionate about, where I can understand the industry, the old Warren Buffett thing. Like if I don't understand it, I'm not going to invest in it. If it's maybe a little bit larger basket of investments, you could take larger dollar amounts and say, let me spread this out across a portfolio where you have high conviction in the industries. Maybe pick 4 to 6 industries and invest that way. But it's tough to be prescriptive without knowing somebody's investment objective a little bit better.
Yeah. Any last takeaways that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, the biggest thing, Lisa, is I advocate for people to take control of what they can, especially when it comes to from a financial standpoint, because we know that this massive bull run that we've been on with the Dow and the S&P for 12 or 13 years, it's probably not going to continue. So if you can at least learn about what's possible and then know what you're not doing, it's better than just saying, I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to explore that space. So it's really about having the wherewithal maybe to understand what's happening. And if you do feel comfortable, consider placing some kind of investment, because then you are going to pay a heck of a lot more attention to what's out there. So it's really taking action in some capacity.
Yeah. And I really think of it as also just a learning opportunity, right? There's the financial wealth upside, but there's also just the wealth of knowledge that you can gain from being an active participant in shaping our culture, our future, the leaders who are going to run the next Fortune 500 companies, or even, it doesn't have to be Fortune 500, but just the communities that are the businesses that our communities are going to be built around. So final question for you, what does profit to the people mean to you?
It means, and this is, I think, a really big deal. This is the time in which more and more people can get involved in projects that they really believe in from the beginning, and not just as a backer of it, but truly participate in the upside. And that's where I feel like Republic and Regulation CF has been just so impactful. If you can take a nominal amount of money and really back a project and say, I'm a part investor, you just feel different. So that's where I feel like this is a massive shift in democratization of wealth, which is so exciting.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being an active investor, for investing in your passions and continuing to move the needle forward for so many of our founders and the companies in our ecosystem.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is provided for educational purposes only by Republic and Republic.co. Nothing discussed should be construed as legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. The views of the presenters may not be the views of Republic and its affiliates. Always consult with trusted professional advisors before making investments. Private investments are inherently illiquid and may result in a total loss. All rights reserved.